Welcome. Welcome. It is good to be together. Going to check.
Yeah, it's using your camera instead of mine.
Okay.
Turn off your camera.
And I'm going to check our slideshow. Good. I'll also share with you all very quickly that we were having conversation amongst our staff over the last half hour or so because I was stuck in traffic coming back from Chapel Hill, which anytime after 5, don't drive back from Chapel Hill. Now I know. I am learning from my experiences. But here we are, and so I'm just getting our slideshow back in action. I'm hoping that out there on Zoom that you're seeing a full screen of our initial slide, our opening slide. It should say Jerusalem continued, and we have a look out over part of the old city of Jerusalem. I will tell you that what you can see on your screen right now is the top, that is the two iconic domes of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. What I've done for our final two sessions for this staycation is to just try to put together a lot of material. I'm not sure how far we'll get tonight. I'm hoping that we'll start down the Via Dolorosa and get to look at the Church of Flagellation tonight, which is an important first step on the Via Dolorosa, that is the Way of Roses, or the footsteps of Jesus toward the cross. And so I'm hoping that we get about that far. Then next time we'll get to finish that walk, and then we'll get to take a look at places like the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the traditional site of the crucifixion and burial of Jesus. We'll also take a look at some other possibilities for spaces where that might have happened, the rock called Golgotha and places like that. But so for tonight, we're going to be taking a continued chronological, step-by-step in the footsteps of Jesus, look at the city of Jerusalem. Remember with me now that we have been imagining that we are spending several weeks in the Holy Land. We've got our technical. Keep talking. Yeah, we're taking this chronological step. We are imagining that we have a few weeks in the Holy Land, and that remember that we booked our tickets technically so that we would be there for a month, because that's kind of how long this staycation is lasting in real time during the season of Lent. But that we just have kind of limited time to take a look at some very specific things. So today we're imagining that as we began our trip in Bethlehem and the area around Bethlehem, and we continued on north into the region of Galilee, the region around the Sea of Galilee, where Jesus did the bulk of his preaching and teaching and ministry, that we have now followed his footsteps back down south again, and that we are finding our way closer and closer to the cross, but trying to follow as much as possible the biblical narrative as the four Gospels talk about those last steps and the way that he entered into the city. So very quickly, we're going to stop sharing. I see that we have a couple of chats here. Oh, yep, echoes. I think we took care of that part. But what I'm going to do is stop sharing real quick and reshare, so that we can take a look on Google Earth and get, again, a really solid understanding of where we are on the planet. And it's going to take a second so that I can get to that. Hoping that you're now seeing my screen. I'm going to pull into RDU Airport. And what we're going to do is just learn a little bit about Google Maps, and we're going to take our flight one more time. Okay, so I want you to watch closely as it zooms out from where we are located here in Raleigh, and then turns the world around as we would see it from the airplane, and then touch down in Israel. So that gives you a sense of how that would happen, how far we've come, how far it is to travel to Israel. This is where we would have landed at Ben Gurion Airport. I'm just going to use my touchscreen here a little bit. Remember that Ben Gurion Airport is right outside of Tel Aviv, the largest and most modern city in Israel. And we'll just flit around a little bit here. Remember that we started by taking a longer bus ride down to Bethlehem and kind of spent some time around there. You can see Bethlehem just south of Jerusalem here. Then we took the hour and 42-minute trip up to Nazareth and saw some sights around the Sea of Galilee. So we're just getting a sense of kind of where we are in the world and where we're headed. You can see that it's a very hilly, kind of a low-lying mountain area all around. We can just tell from the kind of plant life that we can see and the colors that there's a lot of shrubbery, some grassland, some farmland, but basically an impassable road back down south to Jerusalem. So remember, we're following down the left-hand side of your screen what our tour guides here are calling the Via Maris, that is the way of the sea. And it is a highway that still exists. It's a very busy and well-traveled highway, and it dates all the way back to Roman times. The Via Maris is the Latin for the way of the sea, and so we're following the Roman road back down south toward Jerusalem. So we took advantage of our, again, hour and 42-minute or so bus ride as we pulled back into Jerusalem. And I'm going to pull us a little bit closer in here to Jerusalem. On the eastern side of the city, we should start to be able to see the old city of Jerusalem. I've lost where we are just a little bit here. We're starting to see where is it anyway? Oh, here we are. You can always see that western wall. So we're pulling in here so that we can see the outline of the old city here. So if you would remember with me, over on the right-hand side of your screen, we kind of ended last time with this honorable mention with the Church of Mary Magdalene, the beautiful golden onion domes of that church and convent. We spent our time last time over here east of the Old City, east of the Temple Mount, at places like the Dominus Flavit Church, the place where Jesus wept over the city of Jerusalem. We also saw the mosaic of the hen gathering her chicks under her wings, as that is the place traditionally where Jesus said that. And this time we're going to be headed due west back across the Kidron Valley, which separates the Mount of Olives from the city of Jerusalem. From the Old City anyway. We're going to head into the Old City and see a site there. And then following the footsteps of Jesus, remember, we're going to go back across the Kidron Valley to look at the Mount of Olives again. We're going to take a look at places like the Garden of Gethsemane, the Church of all Nations, which is there, et cetera, et cetera. So that kind of gives you a sense of where we are in space. And a staycation, especially a pilgrimage like this one, it's not just like showing slides and talking about history. We really want to be able to feel ourselves in this place. And so I invite you to just kind of take it all in. Try to use your five senses. What do you smell? Well, we're going to be smelling a lot of bread baking as we walk through the city. We'll smell some unfamiliar food smells, some kebabs and curries and falafels and different things that we might not be very well accustomed to, but we really want to take it all in. And so here we're taking a look on the bottom of your screen at the view from the Dominus Flavit Church through that iconic window where the cross points of that brass cross there really meet right at that site of the Holy Sepulchre, again, the traditional site of Jesus' crucifixion and burial. So this is kind of the way that we're headed, and this would be historically accurate as we follow in the footsteps of Jesus. Now we're entering back into the city because we want to see the city as he did. And I'll pause just for a moment so that we can pray together, and then we'll imagine ourselves waking up in the old city of Jerusalem. Let us pray. Gracious God, bless and guide us now as we follow the footsteps of your Son, our Savior Jesus. Help us to see the city not just as he saw it, but as true pilgrims now in the 21st century, seeing it with fresh eyes, with fresh ears, learning about Jesus' experience there, oh God, and may we grow and be united in our faith in this process. In Jesus' name, amen. So I'd like for you to imagine now that we're waking up. We've been in the Holy Land for probably a couple of weeks together. We've spent a little bit of time in Jerusalem, but again, maybe we're waking up in the Lutheran guest house. The last time I checked, it was temporarily closed because of COVID concerns, but I'm hoping that that would open again soon so that when we take this trip for real together, that this is the place that we would be waking up. It is very near to what is marked on the map in front of you as the Hasmonean Palace. Remember, you can, outside the eastern windows there, if you've got an eastward-facing room, you can see the Dome of the Rock and the Temple Mount. I'd like for us to imagine that we're coming down and enjoying the breakfast that's provided there, and most anywhere that we stay together. It would be a breakfast of chopped tomatoes and cucumbers, maybe some cheese slices, maybe some eggs, but definitely some crusty bread. And I invite you to take it all in and to enjoy it, the breakfast, because we're going to need it. There's going to be a lot of walking that we do today. Not only will we follow the red line to the upper room, but then again, we'll make our way back down into the Kidron Valley and back up onto the Mount of Olives. And so we have a long ways to go today. So fill up, because we're definitely going to need it. Now we know that as Jesus entered Jerusalem for the final time, he spent some time in the temple, which we've already kind of walked around the temple. And if you were part of our Herod study previous to the season of Lent, then you got a closer look at what the temple may have looked like, or what it did look like when Jesus was there. We saw the huge porticos and the places where they would have been selling the doves and cattle for the sacrificial system. We would have talked about how that was a perfectly normal system, a completely expected transactional part of the sacrificial system in the temple, and that when Jesus overturned those tables and drove out the money changers, that what he was doing was rebelling against the transactional system that had been so embedded in the people's lives that they give a little so that God will give a little, and instead invite them into the temple that was his body, which will be torn down and raised up again in a revelation of God's pure grace. But then he would have gone from there, the scriptures tell us, in Luke chapter 21. In fact, I'll just read a little bit of scripture here. If you have your Bibles handy out there, you're welcome to join in. Luke chapter 21, verses 37 and 38 said, every day Jesus was teaching in the temple, and at night he would go out and spend the night in the Mount of Olives, as it was called. A little later it says, then came the day of unleavened bread, on which the Passover lamb had to be sacrificed. And Jesus sent Peter and John, saying, go and make preparations for us to eat the Passover. Where do you want us to prepare it? They asked, and he replied, as you enter the city, a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him to the house that he enters, and say to the owner of the house, the teacher asks, where is the guest room, that I may eat the Passover with my disciples? He will show you a large room upstairs, all furnished. Make preparations there. They left and found things just as Jesus had told them, and so they prepared the Passover. When the hour had come, Jesus and his apostles reclined at the table, and he said to them, I have eagerly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. And so we make our way to the southwestern part of the Old City, and we find this interesting little plaque up on an otherwise fairly nondescript wall. This is the place inside the Old City that on tourist maps will be called the Tenants House. Today, it has been built up into a church, and it's technically called St. Mark's Orthodox Abbey. So we enter into the doors that are just next to this plaque up on the wall. You can tell that this is an original Pastor Ben picture because it's kind of blurry, from 2010. We really need to be let into this place. It's the kind of place that we would have called beforehand. Maybe our tour guide would have called beforehand to make sure they remember that a large-ish Lutheran tour group is going to be coming. And so they open these large wooden doors for us and let us enter in. On the first floor of this building is a true sanctuary. It's beautiful. It is ornate. It is not nearly as big as you might be picturing. It is quite closed in and small. And so we'll maybe take a little bit of time, sit in the old wooden pews here, maybe have a prayer together, maybe read the scripture aloud that we've just read. And if we're lucky, then one of the nuns who takes residence here will tell us a little bit about the history of this place. No surprise that it is a place that was marked by St. Helen, that was Constantine's mother, who made pilgrimage through the Holy Land in the 4th century, marked out some of the holy places. She may tell us that underneath where we're sitting, although at least in 2010 we weren't able to go down, but there is an older Byzantine-style chapel there. What we're sitting in here is really a construction over the centuries, only recently claimed as this Orthodox abbey, recently as in the last 100 years or so. But then she'll tell us that the space that is above our heads can be traced back to the place where Jesus sat and ate the Passover meal, which we would call the Last Supper, with his disciples. Upstairs, it's much larger. It really kind of airs out. We can see some what truly feels like ancient archways above us and pillars with real fire torches. Be careful you don't wear too much hair product or set your hair on fire while we're there. We would know this as the upper room in which Jesus and his disciples ate this Last Supper. It opens up into this kind of larger room. We have to imagine that there were furnishings at one point, and whether these are the actual stones upon which they sat, if this is exactly what the room looked like when Jesus and the disciples reclined there, we would have to wonder about that. We're not totally sure about that. Following Luke's story, while we're standing here in this place, we would read, Jesus said, "For I tell you, I will not eat this meal again until it finds fulfillment in the kingdom of God." After taking the cup, he gave thanks and said, "Take this, divide it among you. For I tell you, I will not drink again from the fruit of the vine until the kingdom of God comes." And he also took bread, gave thanks, broke it, and gave it to them, saying, "This is my body given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." In the same way, he took again the cup, saying, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you. But the hand of him who is going to betray me is with mine here on the table." So I'd love for you to hold this image in your mind as we go forward in our Lenten journey together, and as we worship together on Maundy Thursday, as we remember this holy sacrament that Jesus made holy on the night in which he was betrayed. We don't even have to wait that long. Each and every Sunday when we celebrate communion together, you'll hear me say, in the night in which he was betrayed, our Lord Jesus took bread and took the cup. That is a remembrance of not only that time and that moment, but it's also a remembrance of this place, this holy place with these holy stones where this actually happened. We can remember as we dwell in this place together that all of our biblical stories come from a particular place, and you can feel the essence of the words that he said surrounding and filling us as we dwell together in this sacred place. The question through the chat here is, did they have a large table there in that room? We would have to imagine that they did. It's the scripture in Luke says that it was fully furnished. We shouldn't imagine maybe a great big dining table, but maybe a low-lying table, maybe even a stone that was placed on the table, that was placed on the ground. We can imagine them not sitting on upright chairs or stools, but probably reclining, as the scripture says, next to the table. The most likely thing is that all the food and drink was just a few inches off the ground, and that the disciples and Jesus reclined, like sat or laid on the floor next to that. So there are a couple of different ways we could imagine that. As it is in the room these days, there's really nothing in there, but there certainly is space for a large table for 13 to 15 people to recline at. Are there any other questions or comments for the steps we've taken so far? This is a holy and biblical place, and so we dwell here, we take a look around, we kind of look at the city through the view that's available through the windows. This isn't a very tall building, so we can see some of the buildings nearby, but we just dwell here and just kind of soak it all in for a moment. But just knowing that we have time constraints, we gather ourselves up together again. We make sure that we're together with our tour group and with one another and our tour guide. We head back down the stairs, back out into the city streets. Remember, there are no cars in the old city, just kind of narrow passageways, and so we make our way down. We try not to get in the way too much of some carts headed to the bazaar or things like that, and we make our way back due eastward. We head down through the Kidron Valley and back up onto the Mount of Olives, because we know through the scripture that that same night, Jesus left from that table and he headed out to the Mount of Olives to a place called the Garden of Gethsemane. Since we've already seen some of what it looks like around on the Mount of Olives, we'll kind of skip a couple of those. And here we are now in the Garden of Gethsemane. It's in a low-lying place on the Mount of Olives. And so Jesus went to be away from the city. At this point in time, there are developments further east in the city that are technically part of Jerusalem, but this really is a tranquil space, even still today. And it even looks something like what it probably would have looked like in the first century. And so we need to know that Jesus came here to be away, and so we can kind of hear the hush around us as we walk into the garden. And others who have been there may share this memory that it truly does feel like a place set apart. What we're looking at is the Garden of Gethsemane, and worthwhile mentioning here is that the trees are absolutely amazing in the Garden of Gethsemane. The olive tree is truly an astounding tree. The roots of olive trees can live an extremely long time. They even, with all the modern technology and science that we have, we are told that some olive trees are among the oldest living organisms on Earth. Scientific study on the interior of olive tree roots, like the ones here in this area, have shown 1,000, 2,000, or even 3,000-year-old roots. Remember that an olive tree seed kind of remains intact as the roots grow around it. So particularly some of the thicker and bigger trees that you see as it continues to grow outward and outward and outward will be the oldest trees. These particular trees in the Garden of Gethsemane have remained untouched since antiquity. And so it makes it totally possible and plausible that these very trees stood in this garden as Jesus prayed and the disciples slept. And there are many here in the garden that it would take several of us to be able to put our arms around some of these trees. Not that we would really dare to get that close. You almost don't want to touch or mess with anything that's that old that may have been there when Jesus was here praying. Remember that the scripture tells us that right here in the midst of these trees, Jesus prayed while his disciples reclined and were overcome with sleep, and he prayed that the cup might pass from him. One section of one of the Gospels tells us that he prayed so fervently that great sweat drops came from his brow like blood. And so we know that Jesus was greatly distressed here in this place, knowing what was just around the corner for him. Being in the Garden of Gethsemane truly does feel like a space apart, but just over the crest of some of the trees, depending on where you are in the Garden of Gethsemane, right next to us here is a building that you just can't help but be drawn to. This is the Church of all Nations. It is an amazing structure. Chapels line the apse with underground chapels as well. This isn't necessarily a church that goes back to Byzantine time, but rather a church kind of that maybe tries to fulfill Jesus's vision of the temple being a place for all nations, a house of prayer for all nations. And so what we see here at the ground level or the top level in the final construction is a church that was completed in the 1920s. But it does lay on top of the site of several ancient chapels, and they vary in how old they are. The interior of this uppermost chapel is gorgeous. It is completely overlaid, and these front pillars are completely constructed with this pink marble, which you'll find in certain, really churches all over the world, especially Rome is known for this pink marble that is so beautiful. The hallmark spot of the church, however, rests just in front of this main altar. Oh, that gives you another look at the main apse there. Don't you just love the artistry, especially up on the roof? And it sort of, at first glance, looks like the night sky. It helps you to imagine Jesus there, the night that he was betrayed and the night that he prayed there. But the hallmark spot of this church rests just in front of the altar, and this slab is said to be the very place where Jesus prayed in agony. Mark 14:35 says, "Going a little further, he threw himself on the ground and prayed that, if it were possible, the hour might pass from him." And so, again, according to tradition, this is the actual spot where that happened. Oh, that's such a good thing to point out. Do you see the railing around this stone slab is designed to look like the crown of thorns? It's a very interesting touch there. So we spend a little time around there. It's a great place to just pray, to look at the artistry of the basilica that's been built there. We exit back out into the Garden of Gethsemane. And again, we follow the footsteps of Jesus as we find, if that slab truly is the place where Jesus prayed in agony, then somewhere nearby, perhaps where we're standing here in the garden, is the place where Jesus was arrested. The different Gospels tell this story in a different way, but remember that Jesus called for peace. As he was arrested, he went willingly into the hands of those who arrested him. And then Mark chapter 14, verses 53 and 54 tell us, "They took Jesus to the high priest, and all the chief priests, the elders, and the scribes were assembled. Peter followed him at a distance, right into the courtyard of the high priest Caiaphas." And so that informs our next steps together. Indeed, the place where we are going. I know that this is a little hard to see at such a distance, but we'll be headed kind of right into the center of the old city, to the place that is still called Caiaphas's house. When Jesus had been arrested, as would have been the custom, they took him by force to the high priest's palace to have his, and I'll put this in air quotes, trial. Oops. And so we walk again kind of through these winding alleyways of the old city until we come upon a bit of a clearing. This is the place that is called the Palace of the High Priest Caiaphas. And so we can enter in at ground level here, but the really interesting stuff here isn't found at ground level. There are some study rooms and other things that you can find, not just on the ground level, but even above that. You can see a small outdoor chapel across that small courtyard there. But as we enter in, we very quickly start going down, down, down. Remember, when you're in a place as ancient as the Holy Land, you want to make your way down, 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 as far as you can go to see the oldest stuff. And so we do that. And this is just to give you a sense of what it's like. It's a little constrictive. It can be a little claustrophobic, but we make our way down through a series of passageways and down some stairs into the place that was traditionally held as Caiaphas's own palace. And we will find many different rooms. Again, this kind of is what we're seeing as we go. We're getting down into the belly of the old city here. As far down as you go, from time to time, you'll look over and see, nope, we still have further to go. And so we go almost a couple hundred feet down. And so you just feel the air getting a little bit heavier. You kind of smell some mustiness as you walk down amidst these ancient stones. And if you go down deep enough, you can actually find the dungeon. You can only get there if you jump down through this hole. No, I'm kidding. You can actually, these days, there's sort of a rock cut path that you can walk down into the dungeon, but this is what you'll see up above. It is believed that in the first century especially, that prisoners would have been lowered down into the dungeon through this opening that had been cut through this thick stone so that there was no chance for escape. You can still see indentions on the wall. This is a view from above, and you can still see some indentions on the wall if you look very closely, where chains would have been fastened into these stone walls. This would have been really only used for one purpose, and that is to shackle prisoners who were awaiting execution. Jesus only stayed in this place one night, the night before his crucifixion, and we're told that he was brought up from this place and into a place of trial. Not sure exactly where in the midst of this kind of labyrinth of stone where that trial may have taken place, but he would have been hoisted up back through that stone hole and then taken to one or another place at Caiaphas's house in order to be tried. It's worth noting that the indentions that you see on the wall are several feet above standing level, and so probably Jesus stood shackled, hands directly to the wall for the entire night. And so I think it's worthwhile to point out those things. Very near to Caiaphas's palace, it's really just kind of around the corner. We can visit another very important place. While the trial of Jesus was occurring, we know that Peter had followed and waited in the courtyard. Luke chapter 22, verses 55 through 60 begins this way. When they had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and sat down together, Peter sat among them. Then a servant girl, seeing him in the firelight, stared at him and said, "This man was also with him." But he denied it, saying, "Woman, I do not know him." A little later, someone else, on seeing him, said, "You are also one of them." But Peter said, "Man, I am not." Then, about an hour later still, another kept insisting, "Surely this man was also with him, for he is a Galilean." I wonder how they could tell. But Peter said, "Man, I do not know what you're talking about." And at that moment, while he was still speaking, the cock crowed. About 10 feet above ground level today, again around the corner, is this statue, and you can see Peter here, and he looks like he is speaking to the three people who are around him, a younger child, another person, and then a soldier, and he is holding his hands up in defiant denial of knowing Jesus. And notice up on top of the pedestal as part of this bronze statue is the rooster crowing. Around again the corner from that and up a few stairs based on the topography there, you find this door, and it is the entrance to the church that is called St. Peter Galicantu. I wonder, does anybody know what that means? I'm going to pause for a second. Also, if there are questions or comments, and if anybody knows what Galicantu means. Right, canto from singing, and the gallo, the Latin for rooster. So this is the church of the rooster's crow. You can see here what the scene that's on the doors is not the scene of denial, but rather the scene at the Last Supper where Jesus says, you will deny me 3 times. And Peter says, "Surely not I, Lord." You can see that there is a rather large, very beautiful alabaster basilica that's built up on top of some older ruins here. This is a really interesting spot. There are actually 4 levels to this structure. There is the top main sanctuary. You can kind of see the top. This is built right into the side of one of the big hills in Jerusalem. And so as we move through the different levels, you can kind of find these different vantage points. At the top here, and notice the weather vane on top, it is a golden rooster. And so this is the top uppermost basilica, the main sanctuary. It has some amazing, there's another view there. It has some amazing frescoes and altar paintings. Most of the paintings depict Peter in some fashion, and it really goes through the whole roller coaster of the relationship between Peter and Jesus, both the denial all the way through to him receiving the keys of the kingdom. There are also frescoes of him ordering the building of churches. Again, this is a Pastor Ben original, very blurry, but you get the idea. As you move downward from that, and again, there are 4 levels to this structure. When you move downward, you find the mid-level sanctuary with its worship space. And it looks like this. Again, all the different tales of Peter, the good and the bad, and the ugly. It is believed that this structure was placed here in 457 AD when Byzantines erected a chapel here to remember Peter's denial. And down underneath of that, possibly even an older structure. It's hard to see in really any picture, but it is believed that you can see crosses engraved into the stones. Oh, I'm not sure if you can see that in this picture or not, but these would be 4th and 5th century crosses. Further down from this, and you can see it kind of slopes off to your left hand there, and you can see down into kind of a tunnel system. Down in that tunnel system, you can see some servants' quarters, and it connects directly to the tunnel system associated with Caiaphas's palace. And so maybe some servants' quarters there or other things. But this is just a great example of a place that connects us through history to an important piece of biblical truth. And we can see the footsteps of both Jesus and Peter as they play such an important part of the narrative of Jesus' last day. Okay, I'll pause quickly. I want to make sure that there are time for questions, comments, concerns, etc. As we follow the numeric system, and I invite you to maybe Google a map like this at some point, there are also maps right out in the narthex that are some tourist-type looks at the old city of Jerusalem. So if you're ever here in the building, you're welcome to grab one of those maps and just take a closer look. But we move numerically through the footsteps of Jesus because we know that having spent the night in the dungeon, when it was morning, Jesus was seen by Pilate, then taken to Herod, back to Pilate, and finally condemned to death. Jesus would have been moved into a public court to announce his sentencing, a court near to the corner of the Temple Mount, a place that even in the 4th and 5th centuries was well known and renowned as a public court for different kind of legal matters. Today in this court stands a truly fascinating place. This is called the Church of the Flagellation. Flagellation, that means beating. As Pilate was in charge of releasing one prisoner on the feast day, he asked the crowd who they wanted to be released. Matthew chapter 27, verses 20 through 22 read this way. Now the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowds to ask for Barabbas and to have Jesus killed. The governor again said to them, which of the 2 do you want me to release for you? And they said, Barabbas. Pilate said to them, then what shall I do with Jesus, who is called the Messiah? And all of them said together, let him be crucified. So, of note in the Church of Flagellation, and this is really what you notice all around you when you walk into this space, are the stained glass windows. They're much harder to see from the outside. But on the inside, especially on a brighter day, you just see all the colors jumping out at you. So here is Jesus as he is undergoing his trial. You can see here Pilate washing his hands. Remember the biblical scene? Pilate washed his hands of the whole thing. And this is, I think, one of the most impressive things I've ever seen. This is, and there's an important lesson in here as well, so allow me to go down this rabbit hole for just a moment. This is a scene that shows Barabbas, and you can see if you can see into his face, he's rather rough looking. His teeth are all jagged, they kind of stick out. His lips are peeled back. He's got a very scraggly beard. He has some scars that we can see. but he's raising his hands here in just a rejoicing that the crowd, for whatever reason beyond his own knowing, has chosen that he would walk free, while Jesus, who he assumes to be innocent, is going to be condemned to death. We know that Barabbas was held under some very serious charges. We may wonder whether Jesus and Barabbas may have shared the cell that we saw down in the basement dungeon of Caiaphas's palace. We don't know, but you can see his true joy and elation, even if it's a little bit scary, as we can see the soldiers releasing him and kind of pushing him back out into the crowd. And the thing that I learned here that I had never known before, that I think is worthwhile in our pilgrimage, is that I wonder, does anybody know what the name Barabbas means in Hebrew? Anybody out there? Yeah, that's right. Anybody who's been there might remember. Barabbas in Hebrew simply means son of the father. Bar, just like you would hear in bar mitzvah, bar means son, Abba means father, Barabbas, the son of the father. And so I don't think this means that we should not think of Barabbas as a real historical person, but rather maybe to let that historical person grow into a symbol. Because if Barabbas is son of the father, the way that it was explained to us by our tour guide there is that what that means is really every man. Barabbas is every man, every person. And so it adds weight to the story as we think about Jesus being sentenced to die and everyone else being set free, right? Held under very serious charges, as we know, where both saint and sinner, but released at the condemnation of Jesus. And so it becomes a much more powerful, much deeper, much more impactful Bible story when we think about Barabbas not just as some scoundrel who was set free for reasons that he would never understand, but rather that we can all find ourselves in this character of Barabbas as the one who was set free and pushed back into the crowd the moment that Jesus was condemned to die. No, not that we know of, not that we know of. We can always find him in ancient art like this, or classical art like this, or in movies and TV shows because of how kind of scary he looks, I'm trying to think of whether it's Jesus Christ Superstar or some other where somebody hands him a knife and says, go cause trouble again, this is what you're best at. But that's imagining what he may have done. Whitewater?
Repeat the question, please.
Oh, sorry. So the question in the room was, does anybody know what happened with Barabbas after this moment? And we're just sort of left to wonder. And maybe that's a tool of the gospel as well. We're left to wonder, what did he do with this new life that he had been given? I think it's the question that all of the faithful should ask themselves. What do we do with the new life that we're given as Jesus is sentenced to die and we are granted a second chance? Good question. Thanks. So we have begun officially our walk on the Via Dolorosa. Remember, in Latin that means the way of roses, or way of the roses. And there's different reasons for that, but rather than focus on that, let's take a look at the map here in front of us so that we can kind of track our steps as we walk through. And again, this is all contained within the old city of Jerusalem. And so it is winding passageways. Most of it, a lot of it is open air, so you can kind of see the sky above you. Not all of it. Some of it is through some passageways and kind of tunnels. But we have begun the journey here at the Church of the Flagellation and the courtyard that's outside of it. This kind of map is the kind of thing that everybody will keep in their hand as we walk along. There are different ways to track where we're going, but it is the kind of thing where you can take a wrong turn. So we want to stay together as we do this. So first, number one, we've seen now the courtyard and the chapel of the Flagellation. It notes here that the Church of the Flagellation is kept up by the Franciscans, and it functions as a monastery where people are trained for Franciscan ministry there. But then we head, and it's really just up around the corner, to a place called the Church of the Condemnation. This is the archway, and again, everything is so kind of closed in, it's hard to get a wide-angle shot of some of these places. But this would be the archway that marks the Church of the Condemnation. There are all sorts of images cut into the rocks around us that show Jesus being sentenced and then the cross being placed upon him. The sites along the Via Dolorosa. I want to mention, because I have it here, it's not just the Way of Roses, it's also known as the Way of Sorrow. It's also known as the Stations of the Cross. So if you've heard that term before, these are the steps that we're taking now. I should also mention that not all traditions agree on exactly where each thing took place, but there's enough of a consensus. Oh, here again, we can just all around us see these carved images. Oops, and we can also see these places along, this would have been a place kind of between two of the stages, a place where, according to tradition, Jesus rested his hand up against the wall. It is believed that this is the actual stone upon which his hand rested. And so if you would like to, like your pastor did, notice, no wedding ring. I was engaged but not married at this time. You can go ahead and place your hand into that indention that is very much hand-shaped by this point. And each place has a numbered marker. And so we're going to jump ahead just a little bit just because of our time constraints, but you can see this round brass kind of half sphere that's up on the wall next to site number 5, and they are all marked in Roman numerals. So you can see a V in the center of that brass plate, and that marks that this is step number 5 along the Stations of the Cross. I will tell you that we talked about the first few, and I'm just going to backtrack a little bit, and I'm sorry. Station number 4 is the place where Jesus meets his mother. So we can see Mary here trying to console Mary trying to console her son, Jesus trying to console her. We also get some kind of haunting words there. It is better for those who have never been born, rather than to see what's coming next. The place where he placed his hand on the wall. Boop, boop. And then station number 5 is the one in which Scripture and tradition agree that Simon of Cyrene took his cross upon himself. And so you can see up in Latin above the doorway there, Simon Cyrene. And so there are different kind of engravings and things along the way that'll show Jesus handing off his cross or maybe falling and Simon picking it up at the orders of the Roman centurion. Keeping a close eye on our time here. Again, notice the postcards on the right-hand side. You can't quite escape the tourist feel as you make your way down through the Stations of the Cross or the Via Dolorosa. There are lots of maps and postcards and things to buy along the way. But this is the kind of scene that we're seeing as we go, as we walk through the different stations. We may have to wait till next time to really go through the other stations in great detail, but they are traditional sites. Site number 6 here. Site number 7. And if you think that you're missing out on a lot of explanation here, I believe 6 and 7 both are places where Jesus fell down. Jesus fell down from exhaustion and weariness. And so the chapels that are inside these places, if there are chapels like the one here, may well have a little fresco of Jesus kind of falling down to the ground or maybe being picked up, maybe kicked or spit on. That's very common to see. Again, a look at the kind of thing that we're seeing. I believe it is marker number 8 in front of us there. You can see some graffiti on the wall, also lots of graffiti everywhere that you look, especially on the wall between Israel and Palestine, but you find it sort of everywhere, this graffiti that you see along the wall there. Ooh, whoa, 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 whoa. I was trying to see if we could see what that plaque said. But before we know it, we have made our way through stops 6 through 9 on the Way of Sorrows, the Via Dolorosa, the Stations of the Cross, and we find ourselves standing suddenly in the courtyard of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And stations 10 through 14, which is all the rest of the stations, take place around or within this building. And that's going to be our focus for next time, as well as seeing some other traditional sites outside of the city walls where Jesus, it is thought, may have been crucified. But according to the oldest tradition, the building that you see in front of you contains the holiest sites in Christendom, the traditional site of Jesus' crucifixion, and also the site of his burial. And so just looking at our time, before we jump into the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, I want to make sure that we save enough time to really get through there next time. And I'd really just love to open it to any questions or comments that you might see. I will have you notice the kind of structures that we're surrounded with. There's something about the stones that you can tell are quite ancient. This is, at the bottom level, this is a true 4th century basilica. It has been built and rebuilt in several different iterations throughout the centuries and the millennia even. But it really feels like just another building. I mean, when you're used to seeing the basilicas of Rome or the basilicas of South America or elsewhere in Europe, the Washington National Cathedral, St. John the Divine in New York, some of these, Grace Lutheran in Raleigh, when you're used to some of these like tremendous church buildings, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre really just feels like a very old building, but not necessarily in the style or the basilica that we might expect for such a holy site. And the reasoning is because it is truly ancient. And so there's a holiness about it. There is a strength to it as we learn more about the history and travel around there. But the beauty aspect, if you're into the Renaissance type beauty, for beauty's sake that I am, it's not quite as eye-catching as you might think. But it's really what's inside that kind of catches us and moves us as people of faith. So with just a couple minutes left here, I want to leave a little room for discussion. I wonder, people have been texting me, maybe they have questions. Nope. I wonder, are there questions about what we've seen along the way?
Was there any one particular place that really moved you or really surprised you? Something different?
Yeah. The question in the room is, was there anything along the way that really moved or surprised me or the people that I was with? Certainly the Barabas window. I mean, I don't know, we spent a lot of time in the Church of Flagellation, and all the windows that there are to see there, and the different scenes like Pilate washing his hands and things like that. It's just stunning to see those captured in stained glass. And then again, especially the face, just the look of Barabbas of pure joy, along with learning the story behind what that name means and how we're supposed to see ourselves as part of that character in the gospel narrative. So I would say that the place where Jesus touched his hand is a special place, and it's the kind of feeling that you can get in many places throughout the Holy Land, even when you're walking up steps that you know have been there for 1,000 or more years. Not necessarily subscribing to, okay, this is where Jesus' hand was. I mean, there is that power, but just that has been a physical, literal touch point for people of faith through that many generations who have truly believed in the power of what happened here. There is just an essence to that. There's a moving power in that you just can't ignore. It's the kind of things we can glean a bit from slides and conversation, but to be there and to touch it it just moves your spirit. And so I would say that would be one physical, literal touch point, especially for the leader of a tradition that believes so much in sacrament. Because sacrament, remember the waters of baptism and the bread and wine of communion, we take such gentle care in our theology to be sure that we hold onto the physical connection with Christ. And so we can hold that in our hands at communion, we can taste that in our mouths in communion, we can feel that on our heads at baptism. And so there's a very sacramental feeling when you're touching the stone or walking upon the stones where Jesus walked. I would say all along the stations of the cross, there is that overwhelming sense of being in the place where Jesus was. There's a physical connection that can't be replaced. Yes, Benta.
Do you know when those stained glass windows were actually made?
Yeah, those would have been an earlier 20th century creation. The Church of the Flagellation itself is very old. It dates back to 1,000 years ago or more, but those stained glass, the way that we see them now, would be around 100 years old. Yeah. So not ancient, but so faithful in the way that they tell the story in pictures. Remember, the past few weeks I've said something that our tour guide said to us as we began our journey when we were there in 2010. You've been reading the Bible in black and white, now prepare to see it in color. And that's one striking way that you can see those scenes in color. And I love the stained glass windows that we have here in our own sanctuary. They certainly tell a story, albeit kind of in an abstract way, but to see it so clearly in the stained glass is very powerful. I wonder, anybody on Zoom, questions or comments before we wrap up our time together? My watch says we're already done, but my phone says 2 more minutes, so my phone is correct.
I think for Lutherans it's interesting to note that there are 14 stations of the cross, but not all of them are in Scripture. Some of them are based in tradition.
Yes. Yeah, I only got a moment to just sort of make that aside to say that there are some kind of ongoing debates about whether these things happened. Yeah, 14 stages of the cross. The question in the room was, or the comment in the room was, there are 14 stages of the cross, and it's interesting for us as Lutherans to be able to look in on that and say, some of those aren't biblical, they're not scriptural. The second point of Jesus falling, et cetera. I mean, there are points along the way that we can, I think we're free to question, like, did that really happen? But again, enough tradition, enough faith and conversation has gone into it such that you feel a power in those places. The engravings on the wall certainly help, but yeah, we get to kind of wonder about those 14 stages of the cross, particularly in that 6 through 9 section. I'm trying to remember whether those are biblical or not. Maybe none of them are.
Yeah, sometimes there's just that plaque there without much else.
Yeah, right, exactly. And again, so if there has been a lack of describing exactly what each station is, some it's kind of hard to tell. You can buy books that'll kind of explain some things to you, but as you walk along through the corridors, sometimes you just see a big number 8, a big Roman numeral 8, and VIII. And so there that is. You're not sure exactly what that is, but it's one step along the way. And so, yeah. So as we're making our way down the Via Dolorosa, we certainly talk about that and we wonder about that, but we can feel the power of the way as we're headed on the way. And so now, again, we find ourselves at the foot of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. I will reiterate that it's the most highly sought after, perhaps the holiest of all Christian pilgrimage sites. And that's where we'll begin next time. And we'll take a detailed look at that next time. So just keeping an eye on the clock, let's have a prayer together. We thank you, O God, that you have helped us to walk the footsteps of Jesus. We thank you for all the biblical stories that have led to the faith and the tradition that helps us to dwell in these places together. We thank you for the technology that allows us to be in the same spiritual space tonight, even if we're not in the same physical space. But, oh God, we do believe in the power of being in the presence of Jesus, and we thank you that he is with us in so many ways, through the sacraments and through our presence together. We ask that you would bless us and gather us safely together again here next week so that we can see the places upon which the holiest stories took place. Oh God, your story of salvation. We ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate you and the time.
That was great. Thank you, Pastor.
Well, thank you.